Hi, and welcome to Crash Course Cryptozoology. Cryptozoology is a field that is not only filled to the brim with controversial cases, but it is also full of many controversial figures. The subject of today's video combines the two, making it a very difficult analysis that will nonetheless be carried out in as objective a manner as possible. Today, the subject of the Ropen will be discussed. For those of you who may not be familiar with that term, the Ropen describes a flying cryptid reported from Papua New Guinea and some surrounding areas. The Ropen has other names, but is most popularly known as the Ropen, which essentially means bird in one of the native dialects there. One of the most prominent ways in which natives describe Ropen reports are not physically seeing a bird-like animal, but rather what are called Ropen lights. Ropen lights are, supposedly, lights that appear in the sky that, at least the natives and witnesses, do not attribute to stars, aircraft, or other explained phenomenon, but rather usually attached to the story of the Ropen. Many interpretations of the Ropen involve it being a pterosaur. This is stretched all the way from before when we knew pterosaurs had feathers to where we are now, where we are certain that pterosaurs had feathers. Very likely all of them. One of the issues that is brought up quite commonly with the Ropen is that there's a lot of supposedly religious influence on the Ropen. In fact, many claim that the Ropen is itself a creationist fabrication. It's important to note before continuing on that this is not the case. Is there influence on the case from creationist angles? There absolutely is, and there has been for a while. There's no question about that. Native stories of flying animals that they attach these Ropen light stories to, and Ropen lights themselves, however, are by no means a creationist story. One of the first Western scientists to describe Ropen lights was an evolutionary biologist and by no means a creationist, and again, natives have stories of these animals in their mythology throughout many of the areas of Papua New Guinea, attaching them to these alleged lights. What exactly the lights are in reality? Most people assume that they are in fact aircraft or fireflies, celestial bodies, etc. And that is the issue that today's video will be tackling. There is a somewhat controversial paper that was written on a particular piece of footage from 2006 taken by Paul Nation, supposedly of a pair of Ropen lights. The paper was written by scientists Clifford A. Paeva and Harold Slusher. It should be noted that both of these men have religious backgrounds. At the same time, however, both are extremely respected in their scientific fields. Professor Slusher is in his physics department one of the heads, and Clifford Paeva is a missile defense physicist and has had many fields of physics throughout his life be something that he was a big part of. Despite their backgrounds, it's clear that they are efficient enough in their fields to be able to be well respected in them. This is important because there certainly is a rhetoric that not only did creationist influence create the Ropen, which essentially is not true, but that the mere state of being creationist means that one's opinion on the Ropen should not be examined. Because of people like Paeva and Slusher, who have a lot of credentials in being physicists in their field, that rhetoric is certainly called into question. It should also be noted that cryptozoologist Jonathan Whitcomb did a lot of editing and explanations for this paper. The paper can be found in the description, and because of John Whitcomb's very controversial nature and the fact that he has very outdated ideas about pterosaurs, this video presents only the information that was in the original paper's excerpts, not the ones added by Jonathan Whitcomb. Again, to read the paper in its entirety, please go to the link in the description. It's a very long paper, so reading it will take up a good deal of time, so instead there will be in this video a sort of going over of the main points addressed by the analysis. Again, A man named Paul Nation claims to have recorded this back in 2006. He also indicates that apparently he saw the lights move after the video ended. Of course, the video being the video, you don't actually catch that on there. So what we're working with is essentially two seemingly stationary lights. A location was given, there's an examination of the location as well, and there was enough for these two physicists to attempt to determine what the lights are not. So without further ado, let's get into the main points. One of the first main points established in this paper is the location. There is a location given, and it does seem like the location matches the altitude of the lights that we're getting in this video. However, of course, that can really easily be edited just by changing the angle of the camera. So although a location here is perhaps likely, it should be taken massively with a grain of salt. But as it turns out, the location isn't necessarily imperative to the analysis given. One of the first analytical points made based on location, which again is very subjective, is the diameter or the length of these two lights. Using some of the trees in the background, it is suggested that perhaps these lights are roughly 1 meter. However, of course, this point is a bit strange since distance and whether or not the location is truly correct can change that easily. Their first point is not necessarily the most in-depth one. The second large point, which is really kind of one of the first truly significant ones in the paper, is an analysis of the actual lights themselves and the center of the lights, which actually seem to indicate that there is what's called an internal structure within the lights, essentially saying these lights are not only lights, they have a solid source, as indicated by these dark structures seen within the lights. So it is something that is either obstructing these lights or is giving off light. Essentially, this rules out a fire, or in this case, a pair of fires. Throughout the video, these two objects do not move as well, so whatever they are, they're stationary. The fact that they are stationary is indicated by a lack of any of the lights trailing, or any indication that the camera is moving alongside the lights. And essentially, this rules out two of the very popular theories on this, which is that they were planes or that they were fireflies. It's often brought up that a lot of these Ropen lights are seen in no-fly zones. No-fly zone rules they can be broken, especially during the night. However, the degree to which it's safe to do that is questionable, but it can obviously happen. These two lights, according to this physics paper, however, do not move. So they are not aircraft, and they are not fireflies. The lack of a trailing light also suggests that what we're seeing are not meteors or comets, because again, not only are they stationary, but they do not give off any wake of any kind with their luminescence. There is also a lack of smoke or other atmospheric condition around the lights, which indicates that, again, it is not a burning object of some kind. There were many frame analyses made on the lights, and almost all of them indicated that they were two separate lights. While they are two separate lights, however, one particular observation made did seem to suggest that there was a connection apparent between the two lights. Essentially, what's being suggested is, well, if these lights are being given off by two objects, this particular artifact, which is using a negative threshold effect to identify it, seems to indicate that perhaps there is a connecting objects between those two lights. Again, this is the only analysis in which this can be seen. Most of the light diagrams and graphs suggest that there is no connection. What exactly this means is not quite known. There is also a pattern of the border of the lights called an intensity spike pattern. Essentially, it is able to accurately identify whether or not the gradients of these lights seems realistic. And the intensity analysis done in this paper suggests that these are not overlays that have been imposed on the video, but are rather their own independent lights that are actually real in the footage. This is mostly seen by the fact that the light intensity and gradients fits very well with the rest of the footage itself. One of the final bits of analysis indicates something a bit interesting, which is that the light on the left actually seems to be dimmer than the light on the right. It's also lower, and it even dims a bit more as the video goes on. This does not necessarily mean that the light is pulsating, but it does change in intensity over the course of the video. These are all the findings the paper deemed were significant. Of course, in the editing done by Jonathan Whitcomb, he suggests that this means that these must be bioluminescing pterosaurs. Of course, the paper itself actually comes to no such conclusion. The paper is only meant to rule out certain possibilities. Are these fires? They certainly don't seem to be. Are these planes or fireflies that are close to the camera? They certainly do not seem to be. Are they meteorites or comets? No. So what could they be? Bioluminescent pterosaurs is a pretty big leap, even considering the Ropen mythos. Even though natives certainly connect the Ropen lights to the legendary Ropen itself, and there are Ropen sightings, both feathered and featherless, it's not always the case that connections like that are entirely accurate. And of course, the somewhat hypothetical nature of the Ropen itself directs us to look to more likely explanations. The only two explanations that cannot essentially be ruled out are light sources that have an object obstructing them. This can be floodlights that are facing the opposite direction of the camera, perhaps two parked cars that are on a hill facing the opposite direction of the camera, people with flashlights standing behind somebody else. Under certain conditions, even celestial bodies cannot necessarily be ruled out. Stars are one story, planets are another. Ultimately, the significance of this paper is not towards the credibility or lack thereof of the living pterosaur theory. Rather, it's a clarification as to some of the theories on Ropen lights. At least in the case of the Paul Nation video, common explanations like planes, fireflies, campfires are actually ruled out. It doesn't mean that there is no natural explanation, but it's important to narrow down that conversation so that the conversation can progress forward and have a bit more of accurate information to suggest. I found this paper quite interesting myself because it's one of the only scholarly articles that I could truly find on the Ropen that does seem to attempt to make a rather objective explanation of Ropen lights. I would like to additionally say, as a sort of antidote to the controversial nature of many Ropen researchers and research base, I recommend checking out the work of Rex Yappy. He's essentially the only active cryptozoologist in Papua New Guinea right now, and his efforts are something to really look into. Of course, even just seeing the process in action is very interesting, and Rex himself is very passionate about his work. I hope everyone else found it equally as interesting, and I would love to know what everyone thinks. Obviously, this is a very controversial subject, and opinions on controversial subjects can often be the most riveting. That being said, until next time.